The little black girl cried to the biker, saying a stranger tried luring kids behind the back lot this evening. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. It was just a regular evening, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The usual sounds of the neighborhood filled the air, the distant hum of cars, children laughing and playing, and the occasional bark of a dog. But then, a sound cut through the calm, a small, frantic voice calling out in desperation. A little black girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, came running towards a group of bikers sitting outside their favorite hangout spot. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts as she grabbed the leather vest of one of the bikers, her eyes wide with fear. "Please help me," she cried, her voice trembling. "A stranger tried to take my friends behind the lot." The bikers looked at each other, momentarily stunned. The girl, shaking uncontrollably, continued, "He said he had candy, but I saw him take my friends behind the back lot. I think he's going to do something bad." One of the bikers, Jack, stepped forward, immediately sensing the gravity of the situation. His rugged face, weathered from years of riding, softened with concern as he knelt down to the girl's level. "Where did you see him? Can you point us in the right direction?" The girl pointed with a trembling finger down a narrow alleyway between two buildings. "That way," she whispered. Jack turned to his crew. His voice was calm but firm. "Let's move. Stay sharp, everyone. We don't know who we're dealing with, but we need to get there fast." The bikers didn't hesitate. They immediately mounted their motorcycles, their engines roaring to life, a deep rumble that echoed through the neighborhood. The girl, still crying, stood there, her eyes never leaving the path she had pointed to. As the bikers sped off in formation, the sense of urgency was palpable. They didn't know who the stranger was or what his intentions were, but they weren't about to let anything happen to a child on their watch. The sun was nearly gone now, and the streets were growing darker, adding to the tension that already hung in the air. Jack's mind raced as he followed the girl's directions. Every instinct told him that they were running out of time. The back lot was just ahead, and whatever was waiting for them there, they needed to be prepared. The question on his mind wasn't just about the stranger they were after. It was about the safety of every kid in that neighborhood. Who was this man? And why was he luring children into the shadows? The road ahead grew darker, but Jack and his crew knew that they had one goal: protect the innocent and stop whatever was about to unfold. This was no longer just about a little girl's cry for help. This was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. The bikers raced through the winding streets, their motorcycles roaring like thunder, cutting through the evening calm. Jack's mind was focused, his eyes scanning the darkening path ahead. The girl's terrified face kept flashing in his mind, urging him to move faster. The neighborhood, which had once seemed so peaceful, now felt like an alien world, filled with shadows and secrets waiting to be uncovered. As they neared the alleyway, the streetlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. Jack knew they were close. The back lot was just around the corner. The air grew heavier, and the familiar hum of their engines was now drowned out by the sound of Jack's own heartbeat. "This is it," Jack muttered under his breath as he slowed his bike. The others followed suit, their bikes coming to a halt one by one. "Stay sharp," he instructed as he signaled to his crew. They dismounted, their boots thudding against the pavement as they surveyed the area. The girl's words echoed in Jack's ears. "They took my brother." The silence of the night was broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The back lot was just ahead, a dark, empty space where abandoned cars sat, like silent sentinels. It wasn't much of a place for kids to be, but Jack knew there were worse things lurking in the dark. They moved forward carefully, their eyes scanning every corner. Jack led the way, his hand resting lightly on the handle of his worn leather jacket. His crew stayed close behind, each of them ready for whatever came next. As they approached the lot, the first thing Jack noticed was the faint outline of a silver SUV parked near the back. It was the same vehicle the girl had described, but there was no sign of anyone else. No sign of the stranger. Jack motioned for the others to fan out. Search the perimeter. Keep your eyes peeled. The bikers spread out, moving silently between the rusted cars and overgrown weeds. Jack kept his gaze locked on the SUV, his heart pounding in his chest. Something about this wasn't right. He felt it in his gut. As they closed in on the vehicle, Jack's sharp eyes caught a flash of movement near the far corner of the lot. A figure. Jack froze, his instincts kicking in. The figure was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and appeared to be looking around, as if searching for something. Or someone. "We've got company," Jack whispered. His crew closed in, ready to confront whatever threat lay ahead. The figure turned suddenly, as if sensing their approach. For a moment, Jack's heart stopped. But then, the figure broke into a run. Jack's instincts took over. "He's trying to escape," Jack barked. Without hesitation, he broke into a sprint, his boots pounding the pavement as he closed the distance. The rest of the crew followed suit, their boots echoing behind him as they chased the figure into the darkness. Jack's mind raced. Who was this guy? Why was he here? Was he the one who had been luring the kids? Or was there more to this story than met the eye? The figure rounded the corner of the lot, disappearing into the alleyway beyond. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest as he pushed himself harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The alleyway was narrow, dark, and lined with shadows, but Jack didn't slow down. The rest of the bikers were close behind, their heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet night. Jack turned the corner just in time to see the figure, disappearing through a small, rusted door at the far end of the alley. Jack's eyes narrowed. He was not letting this man slip away. "Get ready," he whispered to the crew. They were about to storm whatever hideout this man had. As they reached the door, Jack signaled for everyone to stop. He pressed his ear against the cold metal, listening for any sounds from inside. There was nothing. The silence was deafening. Jack turned the handle slowly, pushing the door open with a soft creak. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and dust. The room was dimly lit, with only a few broken lights flickering in the corners. But what caught Jack's eye wasn't the dim lighting or the old furniture. It was the sight of a young boy, no older than the girl who had cried for help earlier, sitting on the floor, his eyes wide with fear. Jack's blood ran cold. He wasn't sure who this boy was, but he knew one thing. He was in trouble. The stranger had been using the back lot as his hideout, and now Jack had found the evidence he needed. Jack's voice was calm, but firm as he spoke to the boy. "You okay, kid?" The boy looked up at him, his face pale and trembling. They were going to take me too," the boy whispered. Jack's heart tightened. He knew this was just the beginning. They were about to confront the monster hiding in the shadows, but the true battle was just starting. The silence in the room was deafening as Jack stood over the boy, trying to process what had just happened. The boy, no more than 10 years old, was huddled on the floor, his wide, frightened eyes fixed on Jack. The air around them felt thick with tension, the faint buzzing of a broken light overhead the only sound that broke the silence. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they had just uncovered the surface of something much deeper, something far more dangerous. "Who brought you here?" Jack asked gently, kneeling down to the boy's level. The boy looked up at him, his lips trembling. He said we could play with the toys, but when we went inside, he locked the door," the boy whispered, his voice breaking. Jack's heart sank. The man, the stranger they had been chasing, was no random criminal. He was targeting children, luring them with promises of play and treats, and locking them away once they were inside. Jack's mind raced. He needed to find out more. Where was the girl? What had happened to her brother? Was he still in danger? He stood up abruptly, glancing toward the doorway. His crew was still outside, securing the perimeter, waiting for orders. He had to get them in, and fast. "Phantom," Jack called out in a low voice. Phantom, the club's tech expert, came through the door first. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the boy and then Jack. He gave a quick nod. "I've got eyes on everything outside," Phantom said, his voice calm, but Jack could hear the tension in his tone. "You okay?" Jack nodded. "Where's the girl? Where's Maya?" Phantom's expression darkened. "The girl's with Wrench. He's keeping an eye on her, but there's something we need to know. We just got a lead." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "We tracked down the license plate of that silver SUV," Phantom continued. "It's registered to a man named Patrick Donovan. A cop. Been on the force for over 15 years. Jack's stomach twisted. This was worse than he had imagined. A police officer, a trusted member of the community, was involved in something like this. The conflict in Jack's mind was overwhelming. He had promised to protect the children, to ensure their safety, but a cop? The risk was monumental. They were up against the system itself. "We need to act now," Jack said, his voice resolute. "Phantom, I need you to dig deeper on Donovan. I want everything you can find. The rest of you, keep the kids safe. We need to move quickly before things get worse." Jack turned back to the boy, kneeling beside him again. "What's your name, kid?" The boy swallowed hard. "Jamal," he said softly. "Jamal, we're going to make sure you get home safe, okay? But I need you to stay strong for me." Jamal nodded, his lip trembling. Jack's heart ached as he looked at the boy. He was just a child, caught up in a world he didn't understand, a world that was now trying to take him away from everything he knew. But Jack wasn't going to let that happen. Not if he could help it. Outside, the sound of motorcycles revving to life was heard. Jack looked toward the door and nodded to his crew. "Let's move," he said. They had a job to do, and nothing, not even a corrupt cop, was going to stop them. As Jack and his crew exited the building, they made their way toward the alley, their eyes scanning for any signs of danger. The street was still eerily quiet, but Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. They had no idea what they were about to walk into. Was this just a simple kidnapping, or was there a much larger, more sinister plot at play? The girl, Maya, and her brother had been the first victims, but Jack knew that if they didn't stop this, there would be more. Much more. They were walking straight into the unknown, but Jack didn't care. He was going to make sure no more children got hurt. "Phantom, keep digging," Jack said over his shoulder as they neared the entrance to the alley. "We'll need everything you can find on Donovan. We can't afford to make any mistakes." Phantom's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm on it, boss. I'll keep you updated." Jack gritted his teeth, his focus narrowing as they turned the corner. The alley was dark, lit only by the faint glow of distant streetlights. It was the perfect place for someone to hide. Jack's instincts told him that they were close. Too close. And in the quiet of the night, with his crew behind him, Jack was more certain than ever that they were about to face the fight of their lives. The alley was dark, the only light coming from the distant street lamps, casting long, unsettling shadows along the cracked pavement. Jack led the group, his boots hitting the ground with a steady rhythm, the sound echoing in the quiet night. His focus was razor-sharp, every step calculated. He could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. They were close, so close. The door to the building loomed ahead, and Jack's hand instinctively brushed the handle of his jacket, a reminder of the promise he had made. He wasn't going to let anything happen to these kids. Not on his watch. As they neared the entrance, Jack held up a hand, signaling the team to stop. The rest of the bikers fell. Silent, each of them moving into position. Their bikes were parked just around the corner, engines turned off, blending into the shadows. The sound of the city was muffled here, as if this alleyway existed in a world of its own, separate from everything else. Jack's eyes flicked toward the door, the one the boy had pointed to. It was slightly ajar, the faintest hint of light slipping through the crack. "Stay close," Jack whispered, his voice low but firm. "We move in together. No mistakes." The rest of the crew nodded silently, understanding the gravity of the situation. They'd been in dangerous situations before, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just about finding the man who had been luring children into this hellhole. This was about stopping a monster, someone who had been hiding behind a badge and manipulating the system. The bikers moved as one, slipping silently into the building. Jack's instincts told him to be ready for anything. Inside, the air was cold, damp, and smelled of mold. The faint glow of a single, flickering light bulb overhead barely illuminated the room. Jack's eyes scanned the space. It was a small, forgotten storage room filled with crates, old furniture, and stacks of dusty boxes. And then, in the corner, he saw him. The man they were after. He was standing in front of a dusty table, his back turned to them, oblivious to their presence. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was the man who had been terrorizing the kids, the man who had been hiding in plain sight. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, and wore a baseball cap that obscured most of his face. Jack's grip tightened on his leather vest as he took a step forward. "It's him," Jack muttered under his breath, his voice a low growl. Phantom, the tech expert, moved to the side, pulling out a small device and tapping a few buttons. "Got it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We've got him on camera now. This is all the evidence we need." Jack motioned for the rest of the crew to move forward. "On my signal," he said. As the bikers began to circle around the man, Jack's voice cut through the stillness. "You're not getting away this time," he said, his tone cold and unwavering. The man stiffened, and for the first time he turned around. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw the bikers standing in the room. His hand instinctively reached for something, but Jack was faster. In a flash, he was in front of the man, his hand gripping the collar of his jacket. "Not so fast," Jack growled. The man's face twisted into a look of frustration. "You don't know what you're messing with," he spat. Jack's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, his voice steady but full of threat. "I don't care who you think you are. You've been hurting kids, and that's something I won't stand for. You're going to answer for what you've done." The man tried to pull away, but Jack's grip was like iron. "You're not going anywhere," Jack said. As the rest of the bikers moved closer, the man's expression changed, panic creeping into his eyes. He realized he was trapped, and there was no way out. The bikers had him cornered, and they weren't going to let him go without making sure he paid for his crimes. Jack could see the fear in the man's eyes, but he didn't feel sympathy. This man had been hiding behind his badge, using his power to manipulate children. He wasn't going to get away with it. The silence in the room was broken only by the man's ragged breathing. Jack took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling in. This wasn't just about protecting one child anymore. This was about standing up against a system that had allowed this to happen, about making sure no more children had to go through what Maya and Jamal had suffered. Jack stepped back, pulling the man toward the door. "We're taking you in," he said, his voice low but resolute. "And you're going to answer for every single thing you've done." As the bikers moved toward the exit, the man's voice trembled. "You don't know who I am," he said, his voice cracking. "I have connections. You'll regret this." Jack's eyes were cold. "I don't care who you know," he replied. "This ends tonight." With that, they marched out of the building, the sound of their boots and motorcycles echoing in the empty street. The fight wasn't over, but for tonight, they had won. They had stopped the monster in the shadows, and they were going to make sure he never hurt anyone again. The street was eerily quiet as Jack and his crew marched the man toward the waiting motorcycles. The sounds of their boots echoed in the empty night, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy that had led them to this moment. The man, now visibly shaken, stumbled along, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. He had been confident at first, but now, with the bikers surrounding him, the reality of his situation was sinking in. Jack's mind was sharp, calculating the next steps. They had to get the man to the police, but he also knew there would be trouble ahead. This wasn't just some random thug. This was a cop who had used his position to hurt children. Jack could feel the weight of the promise he had made to protect those kids. The night had turned, and now they were facing a battle that was far from over. As they reached the bikes, the man tried to speak again. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed, his voice trembling. Jack shot him a cold glance, but said nothing. The rest of the crew stood tall, their eyes locked on the man as they kept their distance. They had no words for him, not yet. Jack wasn't going to waste his breath on someone like him. As they began to load the man onto one of the bikes, a dark blue SUV pulled up slowly from behind. The headlights flickered for a moment before the vehicle came to a halt. Jack's hand instinctively moved to the handle of his vest, ready for whatever came next. Out of the SUV stepped two men, their postures stiff, their faces hard. Jack didn't recognize them, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "What's going on here?" one of the men asked, his voice gruff. Jack's gaze never wavered. "This man's going with us," he said firmly, nodding toward the man in their custody. The two strangers exchanged looks, clearly not pleased with the situation. "That's a police officer you've got there," the second man said, his voice laced with warning. "And you've got no business taking him." Jack's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what this was. This was the moment they would find out just how deep the corruption ran. The man in their custody had connections, and now they were going to test just how far those connections could reach. "We're not here for a fight," Jack said slowly, his tone calm but firm. "This man has hurt kids. He's not a cop anymore. He's just a criminal." The first man took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand," he growled. "You're making a huge mistake." Jack didn't flinch. I don't make mistakes when it comes to protecting kids. The air crackled with tension as the two men stepped closer. The bikers formed a tight circle around the suspect, their eyes scanning every move. Jack knew the situation could escalate in an instant, and he wasn't sure if he could keep it from doing so. His focus was on the man they had captured, but his ears were attuned to the slightest movement or sound that might signal a problem. The second man took another step forward, his hand brushing the gun holstered at his side. That was all the signal Jack needed. Without warning, Jack raised his hand, and in an instant, the bikers moved in closer, blocking the two men from advancing. I suggest you back off, Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. The first man looked to his partner, his face contorted in frustration. We'll let this go for now, he said, though it was clear he was not happy about it. But don't think this is over. Jack didn't reply. He just nodded toward the bikes. We're leaving, he said, and with that, he turned and led the group back toward the motorcycles. The two men didn't follow, but Jack could feel their eyes on his back, and he knew this wasn't the end. The fight was just beginning. As they rode off, Jack's mind raced. What kind of network had they just stepped into? How far did it go? And who else was involved? The journey ahead was going to be more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The man they had captured, the one who had hidden behind his badge to hurt children, was just the tip of the iceberg. Jack's heart was heavy with the knowledge that they were up against something much bigger than any of them had anticipated. But he had made a promise, and he wasn't going to stop until he had taken down everyone who had harmed innocent kids. As the engines roared to life, Jack pushed his worries aside. He had one focus now: get the man to the police. But deep down, Jack knew they had just uncovered a larger, more dangerous truth, and they weren't going to stop until the whole thing came to light. The roar of the motorcycles filled the streets as Jack and his crew made their way to the police station. The air was thick with tension, and even the familiar sound of the engines couldn't shake the weight of what they had just uncovered. The man they had captured, the one who had been hiding behind a badge, was still bound and silent in the back of one of the motorcycles, his face pale and sweating from the ride. Jack's mind was racing. The bikers had faced down dangerous situations before, but this felt different. They weren't just up against some petty criminal or local thug. They were up against a system, a corrupt officer who had been using his position to prey on innocent children. As they approached the police station, Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't just about one man. It was about everything he represented: the abuse of power, the manipulation of the system, and the vulnerability of those who didn't have anyone to protect them. The station came into view, a large, cold building with its bright lights casting a sterile glow across the dark street. Jack pulled up to the entrance and signaled for the rest of the crew to stop. The engines hummed to a halt, and the street grew quiet once again. They had come this far, but now the real challenge was just beginning. Jack dismounted his bike, his eyes scanning the building ahead. Keep your eyes open, he said to the crew. This could get ugly. As they approached the front doors of the station, Jack's mind kept racing. He wasn't sure what kind of reception they would get inside. The man they had captured was a police officer, and Jack knew that the system wasn't always as just as it seemed. They could be walking into a trap, or worse, they could be turned away. But there was no turning back now. They had a duty to do, and Jack wasn't about to let a corrupt system stand in their way. The doors to the police station opened with a soft creak as Jack pushed them open. Inside, the station was bustling with activity, officers moving between desks, answering phones, and filing paperwork. The air was heavy with the smell of coffee and paperwork. At first, no one seemed to notice the bikers, but as they walked further into the building, all eyes turned toward them. Jack's presence was unmistakable: the leather vest, the hard expression, the crew of bikers at his side. They were not here for a friendly visit. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with glasses, stood up behind the counter, her eyes wide with shock. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jack stepped forward, his face calm but serious. "We need to speak with someone in charge," he said. "We have a suspect who needs to be processed." The receptionist's eyes flickered to the man they had captured, still tied and silent. What is this?" she stammered. Jack glanced over at the officer, his patience wearing thin. "This man," Jack began, his voice cold, "has been abusing his position to hurt kids. He's a police officer, and we have the evidence to prove it." The receptionist's face went pale as she looked back at the man in their custody. She seemed at a loss for words. I'll get the chief, she said, stepping back from the counter. Jack nodded, not taking his eyes off the man. The rest of the bikers stood in silence, forming a protective barrier around the suspect. They weren't going to let anyone slip away from the truth, not this time. Moments later, the chief arrived, a tall, graying man with a stern expression. He stopped in his tracks when he saw the group of bikers standing in the lobby. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone firm but cautious. Jack stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "We've got a problem," he said. "This man here is a cop. He's been using his badge to lure kids and hurt them. We've got everything on him, the evidence, the witnesses. He's going down." The chief's eyes flickered to the suspect, then back to Jack. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the chief let out a deep breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I'm not going to lie," the chief said, his voice low. "This is a mess. A big one." Jack's eyes narrowed. "We're here to make sure it doesn't get swept under the rug," he said, his voice firm. "This man has to face justice." The chief nodded slowly. "You're right," he said, his voice resigned. "Let's get him processed." The atmosphere in the station shifted, and for the first time that night, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. The system, for all its flaws, was still capable of delivering justice. As the officers took the man into custody, Jack turned to his crew. They had done what they came to do. The fight wasn't over, but they had made a difference. As they walked back outside, the weight of the night still hung heavy on their shoulders, but they knew they had won this battle. They had stood up for what was right, and they had protected the innocent. It wasn't over yet, but for now, they had made sure that justice had a chance to be served. The early morning light broke through the horizon as Jack and his crew stood outside the police station, their faces grim with the weight of the past few hours. The man they had captured, the corrupt officer who had used his badge to manipulate and hurt children, was finally in custody. But as they watched the doors of the station close behind him, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. "We've made a dent," Jack muttered to himself, the words barely audible. His crew stood silently beside him, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The victory was bittersweet. Yes, they had stopped one predator, but Jack knew that there were more like him out there, hiding behind their badges and power. And the system that allowed them to thrive was still in place. Phantom, the tech expert, broke the silence. "I'm digging into everything we have on Donovan," he said, his voice calm but focused. "I've already reached out to a few of my contacts. We'll get the whole story soon." Jack nodded, appreciative of Phantom's work. He didn't want to think about the next steps just yet, but they had to be prepared. "What's the situation with the kids?" Jack asked, turning to Wrench, the biker who had stayed with Maya and Jamal during the whole ordeal. Wrench's face was etched with concern. "Maya's doing okay. She's with her mom now, trying to make sense of everything. Jamal, he's still shaken, but he'll be fine." Jack took a deep breath. "Good. Let's keep an eye on them. We don't know what kind of fallout we're looking at yet." As the crew mounted their bikes and prepared to leave the station, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from the chief, the one who had processed Donovan at the station. "We're looking into his background now," the message read. "I can't make any promises, but this is bigger than just him." Jack's stomach tightened. Bigger? How deep did this go? The thought gnawed at him as he put the phone away and climbed onto his bike. "We've got work to do," Jack said, his voice steady as he revved the engine. "But we need to stay focused. This is only the beginning." As they rode off into the morning, Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the road ahead. He had made a promise to protect the kids, to ensure that no one else would fall victim to people like Donovan. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized just how corrupt the system really was. He had seen enough of it firsthand to know that it wasn't going to be easy to take down. The truth wasn't going to be handed to them. They had to fight for it, every step of the way. As they cruised down the highway, the sound of the engines filled the air, a constant reminder of the bond between them all. These were his brothers and sisters, the ones who had his back no matter what. They weren't just a gang, they were a family, and together, they would face whatever came next. The rest of the ride was quiet, the only sounds being the low hum of the motorcycles and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. Jack's mind kept replaying the events of the night. The way Donovan had looked when he realized he was caught. The fear in his eyes when he understood that the bikers weren't going to back down. Jack couldn't help but wonder how many others there were. How many others were hiding behind their badges and using their power for evil. And more importantly, how many of them would go unpunished if they didn't do something about it. The ride was long, but Jack didn't mind. It gave him time to think, to plan, and to prepare for whatever was coming next. As they approached their next stop, a small diner just outside of town, Jack slowed his bike. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was for sure. He was going to make sure the truth came out, no matter what it took. The group dismounted, their boots hitting the ground with a familiar thud. Jack stretched his legs and took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air hit his face. "We'll regroup here," he said, his voice steady. "Phantom, get back to work. Wrench, check in with Maya and Jamal. The rest of you, stay on alert. We're not out of the woods yet." The crew nodded, moving quickly to their assigned tasks. Jack took a seat at one of the booths in the diner, his thoughts racing. As the waitress came over, he ordered a cup of coffee and stared out the window, his mind still on the events that had unfolded. They had stopped one predator, but Jack knew that the real battle was just beginning. And this time, it wasn't just about protecting kids. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how deep it ran, and bringing down the system that allowed people like Donovan to thrive. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jack knew that they were ready. Together, they could take on anything. The diner was quiet, save for the clink of silverware against plates and the hum of the jukebox in the corner. Jack sat at the booth, his fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee, the warm liquid doing little to settle his mind. He had come here for a brief moment of peace, but even the solitude of the diner couldn't silence the thoughts swirling in his head. The world was changing fast, and not in a way that made sense. The more they uncovered about Donovan, the more Jack realized how deep the corruption ran. It wasn't just about one bad apple. It was a system, a network of power and influence that had been quietly destroying lives for years. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw that it was Phantom. "Got something," the message read. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he quickly read the rest. Digging into Donovan's past. He's got ties to someone higher up. This isn't just one rogue officer. We're talking about something much bigger. Meet me at the warehouse. Jack stood up immediately, tossing a few bills onto the table. "Time to go," he muttered to himself, his voice low but filled with resolve. The rest of the crew was already outside, waiting by their bikes. Jack couldn't afford to waste any more time. They had just scratched the surface, and now they were about to go deeper. He couldn't stop now, not after everything that had happened. As they rode to the warehouse, the weight of what was coming next settled on Jack's shoulders. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the certainty that this next step would be the one that changed everything. He wasn't just fighting for the kids anymore. He was fighting for the truth. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and silent, just as it had when they had last visited. The doors were still cracked, and Jack could feel the tension building as they approached. This was where it had all started. The same place where they had first encountered the man who had been luring children into the shadows. Jack knew that whatever they uncovered here could change everything. He pulled up to the entrance and killed the engine, signaling the rest of the crew to do the same. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. They dismounted and made their way inside, the sound of their boots echoing in the empty space. The warehouse smelled of dust and old metal, the air thick with the remnants of past dealings. Phantom was already there, his laptop open and his eyes glued to the screen. "What do we have?" Jack asked, his voice low as he approached. Phantom looked up, his face serious. "This is bigger than I thought," he said, his fingers typing quickly. "Donovan's been linked to a whole network. These people are powerful, and they've been operating under the radar for years. But I've got their names, their connections." Jack's heart raced as he listened. This was it. They were finally getting to the heart of the problem. "We need to take them down," Jack said, his voice cold. "But we need to be smart. We can't just rush in without a plan." The crew nodded, in agreement. They had always been a family, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now, and the danger was much closer. "I've already sent the details to some of my contacts," Phantom continued, glancing back at his screen. "We're going to need more than just us. If we're going to take these people down, we're going to need help." Jack didn't hesitate. "Get whoever you can. I'm done playing nice. This ends now." The tension in the room was palpable, but Jack could feel the determination in his bones. This was no longer just about protecting the kids. It was about taking down a system that had been feeding off the vulnerable for far too long. As the crew gathered around the screen, Jack's mind raced with plans and contingencies. He had made a promise to the kids, to Maya and Jamal, but now he was making a promise to himself. He wasn't going to let these people win. Not this time. We go in, get the evidence, and take down as many of these people as we can, Jack said, his voice steady. This is our moment. As Phantom continued to pull up files, Jack felt the weight of the moment settle on him. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. The fight was going to be brutal, but Jack was ready. They all were. The crew stood tall around him, ready to do whatever it took. They were more than just a group of bikers. They were a family, and they would face this fight together. The road ahead would be dangerous, but Jack knew they had what it took. They were about to bring down a system, and they weren't going to stop until every last bit of it came crumbling down. This was war, and they were ready. The hours passed quickly as Jack and his crew prepared for what would be the most dangerous mission yet. They had uncovered a deep network of corruption, and now, they were ready to bring it down. Phantom had gathered all the information they needed, and Jack had reviewed every detail. The pieces were all in place. The time to act was now. The plan was simple, but that didn't make it easy. They had to move quickly and quietly, hitting the key locations before the people they were after could react. Jack had sent a few of his contacts to cover the exits, making sure no one could escape while they gathered evidence. The rest of the crew was ready to go, their minds focused on the task at hand. As they gathered in the dimly lit room of the warehouse, the tension was palpable. They were standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that if they slipped, there would be no going back. Jack's mind was sharp, but his heart was heavy. This wasn't just about justice for the kids anymore. This was about dismantling a whole system built on lies, manipulation, and the abuse of power. The targets were high-level officials and criminals who had been hiding in plain sight, using their positions to control and destroy lives. Jack knew that exposing them wouldn't just bring them down. It would bring down everything they had built. "We stick together," Jack said, his voice firm and steady. "We take down who we need to take down and get out. No one gets left behind." His crew nodded in agreement. They had done their homework, and they knew what was at stake. This was more than just a mission. It was personal. For Maya, for Jamal, and for every other victim who had been silenced by the system. They had already lost so much, but they weren't going to let anyone else suffer the same fate. "Phantom, you're on comms," Jack continued. "You keep us updated. The rest of you, move fast, move clean." They split into teams, each member with a specific target in mind. Jack led the first team, moving swiftly through the back streets toward the first location on their list. The rest of the crew was already in position, waiting for the signal. The closer they got to the target, the more Jack could feel the adrenaline building in his veins. This wasn't just about stopping one corrupt cop anymore. It was about a war, an all-out war against those who thought they were above the law. They reached the building in minutes, and Jack signaled for the team to take cover. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. They were going to get what they needed, and they were going to do it fast. The sound of their boots hitting the pavement was the only noise that broke the stillness of the night. Jack's eyes scanned the area, watching for any movement, any signs of danger. Phantom's voice crackled over the comms, steady as ever. "You're clear to move," he said. "They're still inside, but they won't be for long. Be ready." Jack nodded and motioned for the team to move forward. As they approached the entrance, Jack felt a wave of determination wash over him. This wasn't just about taking down corrupt cops. It was about making sure that justice was served, that the system worked for the people who needed it most. They breached the doors swiftly, moving in like a well-oiled machine. The building was dark, the air thick with dust and old, stale air. They moved quickly, checking each room methodically, making sure they had everything they needed before moving on. They reached the main office, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The documents they had been searching for were inside. He knew it. The papers they needed to take down the entire network. But as Jack reached for the files, the unexpected happened. The door slammed shut behind them, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. They were no longer alone. "It's a trap," Jack said, his voice cold and sharp. "Get ready." The crew sprang into action, moving into defensive positions, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The sound of doors opening and closing, the shuffle of feet. It all came at once. Jack's mind was racing. They had been set up. They had walked right into the lion's den. But there was no backing down now. "Stay focused," Jack said, his voice steady even though his mind was anything but. "We'll take them down together. No one gets left behind." The team nodded, their resolve unwavering. They had come this far, and they weren't going to stop now. Not after everything they had fought for. The tension in the air was thick, but Jack knew they had one advantage, the element of surprise. They had the element of speed and strategy on their side. It wasn't just about power, it was about knowing when to strike, when to move. The stakes had never been higher, but Jack wasn't backing down. This wasn't just about saving the kids. It was about taking down the whole system, the one that had allowed this evil to fester in the first place. They moved, fast and clean, sweeping through the building like shadows in the night. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The final battle. The fight for justice. The tension was palpable as Jack and his crew moved through the dark building, every footstep echoing through the narrow hallways. They had breached the compound, and now they were fighting not just for the evidence they had come for, but for their own lives. The sound of boots on concrete was muffled by the thick air of the abandoned warehouse. It felt like every corner could hold an ambush, and Jack wasn't about to take any chances. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice steady but low. "We don't know what's waiting for us." The crew moved in a tight formation, their eyes scanning the shadows. Jack's instincts were sharp, his focus narrowed to every flicker of movement, every sound. They had already uncovered the first part of the network, but now it was time to take it all down. They reached the central office. The door was ajar, the faint light from a single lamp spilling into the hallway. Jack motioned for the others to stop. He crept forward, peering inside. What he saw made his heart race. A group of men, armed and ready, were gathered around a table, talking in hushed tones. Jack recognized one of them. It was Donovan's superior, the man who had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. He was the one who had been pulling the strings all along. Jack's blood ran cold. He had expected this, but seeing it in person made it all the more real. This wasn't just a few bad cops. This was a whole criminal enterprise, deeply embedded in the system. Jack signaled for the crew to spread out, positioning them around the room. His mind raced. This was their moment. The final confrontation. The fight for justice. "On my mark," Jack said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We move in fast. Take them down clean." The crew nodded, the seriousness of the situation sinking in. Jack knew this wouldn't be easy, but there was no turning back now. The time for talking was over. They had come this far, and they were not going to stop until they had dismantled the whole operation. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Go," he ordered, and in an instant, the crew burst into the room, guns drawn. Chaos erupted in the blink of an eye. The men at the table scrambled to their feet, reaching for their weapons, but it was too late. Jack's crew was too fast, too precise. The first man fell to the ground, disarmed and helpless. Jack moved with practiced efficiency, his eyes locked on Donovan's superior. The man tried to reach for his phone, no doubt trying to call for backup, but Jack was quicker. He kicked the phone out of his hand and slammed the man against the wall, pinning him with his forearm. "You're done," Jack growled, his voice low and dangerous. The man struggled, but Jack wasn't having it. This was the end for him, and he knew it. "You thought you could get away with this?" Jack spat. "You've been using your position to hurt innocent people, and now it's over." The man's face twisted with frustration and fear. He had underestimated Jack, and now, he was paying the price. "You don't know who you're dealing with," the man sneered. "I'll have you all killed for this. You'll never get away with it." Jack smiled coldly. "We already have." He motioned for one of the crew members to cuff the man. They had the evidence. They had the names. And now, they had the head of the operation. Jack took a moment to let it all sink in. They had done it. They had taken down the network that had been hurting so many for so long. But even as he felt the rush of victory, Jack knew there was more to do. This wasn't over yet. There were still others out there, still more to uncover. But for now, they had won. They had delivered a blow to the heart of the system, and the fight for justice had taken a significant step forward. As the crew moved to secure the building and ensure there were no more threats, Jack stood in the middle of the room, breathing in the air of victory. They had done it. But there was one thing Jack knew for certain. They weren't done yet. The world they had just exposed was just a fraction of what was out there. But they would keep fighting. They would keep standing up for the innocent. No one was going to stop them. They had come together for a cause, and they were going to see it through to the end. The bikers filed out of the room, taking the captured men with them. Jack was the last to leave. As he turned to leave the building, he glanced back one last time. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Jack knew that this was only the beginning. The sun was setting on the horizon as Jack and his crew sat in the parking lot of the abandoned warehouse, the adrenaline of the night slowly beginning to fade. They had taken down the operation, captured Donovan and his accomplices, but Jack knew this was far from over. The truth was out there, and it was only a matter of time before they had to face the full force of what they had exposed. The fight was just beginning. Jack took a deep breath and leaned against his bike, his hands resting on the handlebars as he stared out into the distance. His crew was busy, some of them talking to the police who had arrived on the scene, others securing the evidence they had gathered. There was still work to be done, but for now, Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe. "We did it," Wrench said, his voice filled with pride as he walked over to Jack. "But there's more to this. Much more." Jack nodded, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "I know," he said quietly. "But tonight, we take a breath. We've earned it." Wrench chuckled. "You know we never stop," he said. "There's always another fight. Always someone else who needs saving." Jack smiled grimly. "I didn't expect it to be easy, but I thought we'd have more time before we dug up this much trouble." Phantom, who had been on his laptop in the back of the van, now walked over, his face serious. "Jack, you're going to want to see this," he said, holding up the screen. Jack stood up straight and walked over. On the screen, a list of names flashed by, each one linked to various corrupt officials, businessmen, and law enforcement officers, people who had been helping to cover up Donovan's crimes for years. The list was long, and Jack could feel his stomach tighten. This was much bigger than anyone had anticipated. "This is just the start," Phantom continued. "These are the people who were helping him keep everything quiet. But there's more. I've traced some of these connections. They go straight to the top. We're talking about a full-scale operation that's been running under the radar for years." Jack's heart sank as he stared at the names on the screen. He had known they were going up against something big, but this was something else. These weren't just local thugs. They were powerful people with connections, people who had been pulling the strings for a long time. The weight of what they had just uncovered hit Jack like a ton of bricks. He looked at the crew, each one of them standing silently, their faces a mix of determination and concern. "We take them down," Jack said, his voice steady, but his mind racing. "One at a time. We bring them all down." Wrench looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's the spirit," he said. "But it's going to take more than just us. We'll need help." Jack nodded. He had already sent out word to some of his contacts in the biker community, but they were going to need more than just muscle. They needed strategy, planning, and, most importantly, they needed time. Time to gather the rest of the evidence, to expose every last person who had been involved in this corrupt web. "We can't do it alone," Jack said. "But we've got allies. And we've got the truth. That's all we need." Phantom continued to work on his laptop, scrolling through the files. "We've got everything we need to take this down. We just need to move fast. These people won't hesitate to come after us once they realize we're onto them." Jack turned to face the group, his voice low but filled with purpose. "We've already started a war, but we're going to finish it. No more hiding. No more silence." The crew nodded in unison, their resolve hardening. They had come too far to turn back now. Jack could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him, but he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. "We'll need to stay ahead of them," Jack said. "We move fast, gather everything we can, and hit them where it hurts. We can't let them get the upper hand." As the crew made their plans, Jack's mind kept going. Over the names on the list, they had already taken down Donovan, but the people who had been helping him, those were the ones who needed to be exposed. And with each step, they would get closer to the truth. But they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. There was no room for error. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the crew gathered their gear and prepared to hit the next location on the list. Jack climbed back onto his bike, his hands gripping the handlebars with a fierce determination. The fight wasn't over, and he was ready. They had made it this far, and now, They were going to make sure that the people behind the corruption would never have a chance to hurt anyone again. The road ahead was dangerous, but Jack and his crew were ready to face whatever came their way. Together, they were unstoppable. The night was falling fast, and the crew had already hit several locations, gathering more and more pieces of the puzzle. Jack could feel the weight of the task ahead, but he wasn't about to back down. They had come this far, and now they were moving closer to bringing down the entire network. Every lead, every connection Phantom dug up, painted a clearer picture of just how deep this corruption ran. The names on the list were more than just criminals. They were the people in power, the ones who controlled the system. Jack's mind kept returning to the same thought. How many lives had they ruined? And how many more were still at risk if they didn't finish what they had started? The crew was back at their base of operations, an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it had served them well over the past few days. They were using it as their command center, a place to regroup, plan, and get the information they needed. Jack sat at the table, looking over the maps Phantom had compiled. Each location was marked, each name connected, and Jack could see the pattern forming. It was a web of influence, stretching far beyond what they had initially imagined. "We're getting close," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We can't stop now." Wrench, who had been silent for most of the evening, finally spoke up. "What happens when we get to the top?" he asked, his tone serious. "I mean, these people have connections everywhere. You're talking about powerful people. What if we're walking into something bigger than we can handle?" Jack looked at him, his gaze unwavering. "We handle it," he said. "We've been through worse. And this time, we've got the truth on our side. They can't hide from that." Phantom, who had been reviewing more files, looked up from his laptop. "He's right. We've got the evidence we need. They can't stop us now. But we need to keep moving. The clock's ticking." Jack nodded. He knew Phantom was right. The longer they waited, the more time the corrupt officials had to cover their tracks. "All right," Jack said, standing up. "We move on the next target. We hit them hard and fast, before they can even react." The crew gathered their things and prepared to leave. As Jack walked toward the door, he felt the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing down on him. They had already taken down a few key players, but there was still much more to do. The network was vast, and every name on that list represented someone who had betrayed their position of trust for personal gain. Jack wasn't going to let them get away with it. "Let's go," Jack said, his voice resolute. The crew followed, and they were soon back on their bikes, heading toward the next location. The streets were quieter now, the city starting to settle for the night, but Jack could feel the tension in the air. He knew they were about to face a fight, and he wasn't sure how it would play out. They had already taken on so much, but now, they were getting closer to the heart of the operation. Jack's mind raced as they rode. Who would they find waiting for them this time? What kind of opposition would they face? His thoughts were interrupted by Phantom's voice over the comms. "I've got a hit," Phantom said, his tone sharp. "We're close. I've just tracked one of the main players to a warehouse just outside of town. We need to move quickly." Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. He signaled to the crew, and they picked up the pace, their engines roaring as they sped through the streets, headed toward the warehouse. The building loomed ahead, dark and ominous. Jack could feel the tension building. This was their chance to take down one of the key players, but he knew it wasn't going to be easy. The warehouse was surrounded by a high fence, with guards stationed at the entrances. Jack didn't hesitate. "We move in fast," he said. "Take down the guards, get inside, and get what we need. No mistakes." As they approached the entrance, Jack signaled for the crew to split up. They had done this before, and they knew exactly what to do. The crew moved with precision, each of them knowing their role. Jack took point, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of trouble. They reached the fence, and Jack was the first to scale it, followed closely by the rest of the crew. As they dropped down on the other side, they could hear voices coming from inside the warehouse. Jack motioned for the crew to be silent as they moved closer. The door was just ahead, and they could see the guards standing watch. Jack's pulse quickened. This was it. They had come this far, and now they were about to confront the people who had been pulling the strings. They had to be quick, efficient. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Jack moved forward, his body tense, ready for anything. They breached the door, and in an instant, the guards were on the ground, disarmed and taken out without a shot fired. Jack's heart was racing as he led the crew into the heart of the warehouse. It was dark inside, but the crew moved with purpose, knowing exactly where to go. Jack's eyes locked onto the files they had come for. These were the final pieces they needed to bring the whole operation down. But as he reached for them, the lights flickered on, and Jack felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't alone. The lights blazed on in an instant, flooding the warehouse with harsh fluorescent light. Jack froze, every muscle in his body tensing. The room around him suddenly seemed too large, too open. He could feel the eyes of the crew on him, but he didn't dare look back. The files they had come for were just within reach, but now something else was pulling at the edge of his focus. They weren't alone. "Move!" Jack barked, his voice sharp, cutting through the thick air. His instincts kicked in as he pivoted, scanning the room. In the far corner, shadows moved, figures emerging from behind stacks of crates and machinery. It was too late to back out now. The men in front of him were armed, their eyes cold with the same determination that Jack had seen in his own crew. It was clear. The network they were trying to dismantle was more deeply entrenched than anyone had anticipated. They had reached the final confrontation. Jack took a step forward, positioning himself between the crew and the unknown threat. The other bikers instinctively fanned out, each of them taking cover behind whatever they could find. The seconds stretched on like hours. Jack's hand hovered over the gun holstered at his side. But this wasn't just about firepower. This was the moment where their will would be tested. "You've come too far to turn back," Jack muttered to himself, setting his jaw. Then, without another word, he stepped forward, his voice steady. "We're not leaving without everything we came for." Phantom, already scanning the situation, spoke quickly. "I've got eyes on the entrance," he said. "We've got backup on the way, but we're going to have to hold this position until they arrive." Jack nodded, acknowledging Phantom's words, but his focus never wavered. He had to make sure they moved first. The sound of boots hitting the concrete echoed from the other side of the warehouse as more armed men emerged from the shadows. Jack's mind raced. It was a standoff now, a battle of patience. They had the element of surprise, but how long would it last? How many of these men were in on the operation? How many had their own stake in keeping this dark network alive? "We're not here to fight," Jack called out, his voice strong and commanding, hoping to buy a little time. "But we're not walking away until this ends." For a moment, everything was silent. The tension in the room thickened. Then, one of the men in the back stepped forward. He was tall, his face covered with a mask, but Jack could tell by his posture that he was the leader. The man's cold eyes locked onto Jack's. "You think you're going to take us down?" the man asked, his voice low and dangerous. Jack didn't flinch. "I know we are," he said, his words unshaken. "You're done. This whole operation ends tonight." The masked man laughed darkly. "You've got no idea what you're up against. This isn't just about a few corrupt cops. This goes all the way to the top. You're messing with people who own this city." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I don't care who you are," he replied firmly. "You've hurt too many people, and that ends now." The man stepped back, signaling to his men. Jack could feel the tension rise as the bikers and the operatives locked eyes, each waiting for the next move. Jack's mind was sharp, calculating. He needed to make a move, a decision that would tip the scales in their favor. Then, just as the standoff seemed to reach its peak, Phantom's voice crackled through the comms. "We've got backup on the way," Phantom said. "But they're going to be a few minutes. We need to buy time." Jack nodded. "Hold tight," he said. "We make our move when we have the chance." The moments dragged on, but then, a shout broke the stillness. "Get down!" Wrench yelled as he dove behind a pile of crates. Gunshots rang out in rapid succession. The world around Jack seemed to slow down, but his training kicked in, and he moved instinctively. He ducked behind a steel pillar, just as more shots rang out. His crew reacted instantly, diving for cover, their weapons drawn, ready to return fire. But Jack knew this wasn't a fight they wanted. They were outgunned and outnumbered, and time was running out. "We don't finish this with bullets," Jack muttered under his breath. "We finish it with brains." With a quick signal to Phantom, Jack nodded. Phantom immediately tapped a few commands into his device, and suddenly the warehouse's lights flickered and went out. The whole building plunged into darkness. The sound of chaos filled the air as the operatives scrambled, disoriented in the blackness. Jack moved with speed, guiding his crew through the shadows, using the cover of night to their advantage. They were moving fast, making their way to the files they had come for. The mission wasn't over yet, but they were closer than ever. As Jack reached the desk, he grabbed the files in one swift motion. He turned to the crew, eyes glowing with a fierce determination. "We've got what we came for," he said. "Now we get out." As they made their way toward the exit, the sound of backup arriving in the distance gave Jack a sense of relief. But even as they moved through the final stretch, Jack knew they weren't safe yet. The war they had started was far from over. They had taken down one layer, but the rest of the network was still out there, waiting. But Jack wasn't done. Not by a long shot.